Valley's sheer rock wall loomed. No pack mule could climb its slopes. No trader could risk the narrow goat path that clung to its western edge. For the village, that meant one thing: no way to sell their grain, no way to buy salt or medicine through the winter snows. The first bad winter came 5 years ago. Warm rains rotted the stored grain in cellars. Everyone cut rations by half, survived on foraged roots and thin soup. The second bad winter came 3 years later. Early frost killed the entire standing crop before harvest. Children went to bed crying with empty bellies. Old people stopped getting out of bed to save what little food was left for the young. Half the village's sheep died of hunger that winter. No one had a solution. The government in the lowlands sent no help. The village's elders talked of abandoning the valley, of scattering to other towns to beg for work. No one wanted to leave the land their ancestors had farmed for 100 years. They were trapped. They were hungry. They had no way forward. Ming did not look away from the ridge. He shifted his weight, dug the heel of his boot into the loose dirt at his feet, and spoke. He said, "We've waited for help that never comes. We've talked of leaving our homes until our throats are sore. What if we don't wait? What if we move it?" Li Wei blinked. He leaned forward, thought he had misheard. "Move what?" "Move the mountain," Gao Ming said. "One stone at a time. We don't have to move it all this year. We don't have to move it all in 10 years. We just take one stone every day, carry it down to the valley. Someday it will be gone, or at least enough to cut a path through." Li Wei stared at him. The idea was insane. It was impossible. It was the only idea anyone had put forward in 5 years that did not end in surrender. He thought of his youngest daughter, who had cried for bread every night through the last winter. He thought of the land his grandfather had cleared by hand, of the wells his ancestors had dug one bucket of dirt at a time. He stuck out his hand. "One stone at a time," he said. Gao Ming took his hand, shook it once, firm and final. They counted their tools that night. They patched their baskets. They sharpened their crowbars and checked their ropes. They agreed to meet at the base of the ridge. When the first light hit the slope, they would start digging at dawn. The first light touched the ridge right on schedule. Gao Ming and Li Wei met at the base, shouldered their tools, and started up the slope. They dug at the loose topsoil first, prying loose small stones from the packed earth. They dropped each stone into their woven baskets, carried the full loads down the gradual western slope, and dumped them into the deep gully at the foot of the mountain. They turned around, climbed back up, and started again. They worked through the midday sun. When the rock grew so hot, it burned through the palms of their work gloves. They drank water from a leather skin they kept in the shade, ate a quick meal of flat bread and pickled vegetables at midday, and went back to work before the sun had moved an inch down the sky. On the third day, a loose stone slipped and caught Gao Ming's ankle. He wrapped it in a strip of clean cloth, rested one afternoon, and was back digging the next morning. They worked every day, rain or clear, only stopping when the sun dropped fully below the horizon, and they could no longer see the cracks in the rock. At the end of the first full month, they stopped to count every stone they had carried down. They had moved 372 stones. The pile at the bottom of the gully stood waist high. They climbed back up to the ridge and stepped back to look at their work from a distance. They tilted their heads, squinted, and scanned the slope from base to peak. The mountain barely seemed smaller. You could not tell any work had been done at all, unless you knew exactly where to look. Voices carried up the slope before the first villager stepped into view. Word of the two men's project had spread through the village in the month they worked. Now the whole neighborhood had walked out to see the result for themselves. They clustered at the base of the ridge, hands on their hips, pointing up at the still massive mountain. No one stepped forward to help. No one offered water or encouragement. They had come to watch the fools admit defeat. Old Wang pushed through the crowd, leaning on his own farming hoe. He had the most land to work, the most time to lose, and he had made a promise to himself to put a stop to this nonsense before it dragged any other men away from their fields. He walked within 10 feet of Gao Ming and Li Wei, spat a thick stream of tobacco juice into the loose dirt at their feet, and laughed. 30 days of back-breaking work, he said. For this, You've moved 372 stones, and the mountain's still got 10,000 times that left. You're wasting good farming time that could feed your families on a fool's dream. You'll both be dead of old age before you cut a path big enough for a goat. A murmur of agreement rolled through the crowd. A young boy at the back threw a small clod of dirt that bounced off Li Wei's empty carrying basket. More laughter. Gao Ming just wiped the sweat from his brow with the back of his forearm. He bent down, picked up another small stone that had been pried loose the day before, and set it in his basket. Li Wei checked the frayed rope tied to his carrying basket, tightened the knot to hold it secure, slung it back over his shoulder, and turned to start up the slope again. He did not look at the crowd. He did not stop to argue. He just kept walking. The crowd left when the sun dipped low, still laughing at the two stubborn fools. Gao Ming and Li Wei did not leave. They climbed back up that same day, pried another dozen stones loose, and carried them down before they headed home for the night. They came back at dawn the next day, and the day after that. Snow fell and melted. Spring rains came and softened the rock, then baked dry under summer sun again. Their hands grew more calloused, their steps slowed, but they never missed a full day of work. Gao Ming's son grew old enough to lift a small stone, then to carry a full basket. He joined his father at the ridge every morning after he finished his chores. A few years later, Li Wei's grandson learned to tie the carrying ropes, and he took his place on the slope too. Year after year, the ridge shrank. Foot by foot, ton by ton, the path cut deeper into the rock. By the 40th winter, half the ridge was gone. The opening was already wide enough for two men to walk side by side. They marked their progress that autumn, sharpened their shovels, and planned to clear the last third of the slope the next spring. Then the first heavy snow fell. It melted in midwinter, when warm rains came early and soaked the loose soil on the cleared slope. The ground shifted once, deep in the mountain. Then, half the cleared slope broke loose. It roared down the mountain in a roar of rock and mud, burying the lower path they had spent 40 years carving. By dawn, the landslide settled. Half their work was gone. The mountain had swallowed 40 years of effort, all in one night. Gao Ming and Li Wei reached the ridge just as the sky turned pink with the first light of spring. They stood at the base, staring up at the raw, mud-choked slope where their path had been. The landslide had scoured the hillside clean, leaving nothing but exposed loose rock and tangled, uprooted trees. The air smelled of damp earth and crushed stone. Every step they took toward the slope dislodged a cascade of small pebbles that rolled down past their boots. Word of the landslide had spread through the village by dawn. Old Wang had ridden his donkey out to see it for himself, certain the disaster would finally break the two old men's stubborn foolishness. He stopped beside them at the base, leaning on his hoe, and waited for one of them to speak first. For a long minute, no one said anything. Gao Ming shifted his shovel from his right hand to his left, tested the weight of it on his shoulder. His joints ached with every movement, 40 years of work settling deep into his bones. He had buried his wife 3 winters before. He could have stayed home, let the mountain win, spent his last years sitting by the fire. He did not. Spring's here, he said. Farming can wait one more season. He turned and started up the slope, stepping carefully around the loose boulders the landslide had left. Li Wei adjusted the leather strap holding his carrying basket, nodded at old Wang without speaking, and followed right behind him. They did not look back. They climbed slowly, carefully, picking their way through the debris, until they reached the base of the remaining cleared slope. They dropped their baskets in the mud. Gao Ming drove the edge of his shovel into the first loose pile of earth. The work started again, from the bottom up. Seasons turned again, steady and unforgiving. Each spring, the men and their helpers climbed the slope before the first planting. Each autumn, they stayed until the first frost bit into their knuckles, prying loose another section of rock. Gao Ming was 70 when his son, already middle-aged, took over most of the heavy lifting on the slope. Gao Ming could no longer carry a full basket of stone down the mountain, but he still came every day. He sorted loose rock, sharpened the shovels, and taught the younger men how to read the mountain's cracks, how to pry a boulder loose without triggering a small slide. 3 years later, Gao Ming's son twisted his ankle badly, stepping off a loose rock. He could not climb for 6 weeks. His own 15-year-old son packed his basket before dawn that first Monday, climbed the slope alone, and took his father's place at the rock face. No one told him to go. He just went. The work never stopped. When Li Wei could no longer climb the slope at dawn, his grandson took over his daily spot and brought his own younger cousins along on weekends to help clear loose soil into the gully. What had once been 2 men against a mountain became 3 generations, passing the shovels and the ropes and the lessons from one to the next. The stone pile at the base of the mountain grew taller every year. The ridge shrank, foot by foot, each season a little lower, the opening a little wider. The 2 old men sat on the rock pile at the end of every day, watching the sun set over the pass they had carved. They did not talk much. They did not need to. They knew the end was coming. They just could not see it yet. Dawn broke crisp and sharp that October morning, the air so cold it stung the lungs when you breathed deep. The frost glazed the remaining rock face, turning it pale silver under the rising sun. Gao Ming and Li Wei had been carried up the slope that morning by their grandchildren, leaning on their shovels to stand at the work face. All that remained was one single giant boulder, wedged tight in the gap, blocking the last 10 feet of the path. For 3 days, the younger men had worked to loosen the rock around it, chipping away at the packed earth that held it fast. The ropes were tied, new and thick, woven from hemp by the village women the winter before. Gao Ming leaned his shoulder against the shovel handle, nodded to Li Wei. Li Wei lifted one gnarled hand and called the signal to pull. The men leaned back, boots braced against the slope, muscles straining against the rope. The boulder shifted. It settled back. One rope frayed. Then it snapped, whipping back across the slope and sending 2 men stumbling to avoid the lash. No one was hurt. They reset the ropes, added a second line tied around the far end of the boulder, and repositioned their footing. The younger men moved to the new pull points, their breaths fogging in the cold air. Li Wei lifted his hand again. He held it for a beat. Then he dropped it. The men pulled. The younger generation dug their heels in, pulled with everything they had. The boulder shifted. It creaked, a low, grinding sound that rumbled down the whole mountainside. It came free. It rolled. It bounced once off the slope. Then it tumbled end over end down the mountain, gathering speed until it crashed into the gully at the base, throwing up a cloud of dust and loose rock that hung in the clear air for minutes. Gao Ming and Li Wei stood in the sun on the other side, breathing the air of the valley they had worked a lifetime to reach. They did not cheer. They did not cry. They just stood and looked and let the sun warm their old bones. The next week, every able-bodied family in the village brought their tools up the slope. They widened the footpath, graded the loose sections, and packed the dirt solid enough for pack mules. The first pack train went through a month later, loaded with grain from the next valley, enough to fill every empty storehouse before the winter snows closed the high slopes. The village ate that winter. No one went hungry. For the next 9 years, mule trains carried goods back and forth through the pass. Traders stopped to rest at the village, and new coins started flowing into the local markets. Then, late in the 9th year, heavy rains flooded the old mountain detour that had served the village for generations. The stone bridge washed out, and the side road slumped into a ravine, too far gone to repair before the next winter. The village turned to the pass Gao Ming and Li Wei had opened. The whole village turned out, working together through the spring and summer, grading the slopes, laying crushed stone from the cleared ridge, and building retaining walls along the gully. Within a year, the path became a wide, solid wagon road that could carry 2 loaded carts side by side.